This episode of Pilbara Insights will take a look at course or unit evaluation and what should be considered, including things like teaching methods, classroom capacity, and relationship to the degree. We'll also discuss the program forecasting tool, a tool that provides an instantaneous 5-year financial forecast for newly proposed programs by utilising the large amount of detailed data from an underlying activity-based cost model.
What ABC does is helps crystallize your thinking about the main drivers. Despite having an ABC model, when departments came and said, we want to do a new degree program, can you do a financial viability? It started becoming very difficult. This wonderful regression analysis, where we dichotomize fixed and variable costs of teaching, can be harnessed into a compressed tool that gives us a viability estimate. And so it saved me a lot of time.
You are listening to Pilbara Insights, the podcast, the first dedicated audio series to support higher education leaders in their academic resource management decisions. The series will showcase the industry's most respected and experienced experts, explore the topics of program review and optimisation, course evaluation, faculty effort, departmental research, planning and budgeting, and the key benefits of activity-based cost modelling for evidence-based decision-making.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Pilbara Insights. I'm your host, Lee Patterson, and today I'm talking to Fred Reich, the corporate management accountant at the University of Wollongong. Hi Fred, how are you?
Good, Lee. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Now today we are going to discuss course and program evaluation, or I believe down in Wollongong it's units and courses. So to start with, Fred, do you want to explain what terminology you use at the University of Wollongong?
Lee, it's funny, higher education can't seem to really agree on standard terminology for some things. And this is one of them. The lowest level of study pretty much is a subject or a unit. We call them subjects at Wollongong. And then that's part of a larger program of study that leads to a degree. And we call those courses, whereas some universities, or many different universities around the world, flop those two things. So they think courses are the lowest level.
It changes. It changes through Australia and it changes, through the US and Canada as well, we've noticed.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose the instance that we're talking about, a unit instant, is very important in costing because of the way, costs can change depending on the various parts of that unit.
Yeah, so when you talk about units, you're talking about subjects, so like Engineering 101, and the courses are degrees, so that'd be like the Bachelor of Engineering, and the unit instance at Wollongong would be when, where, and how that unit is taught. Is that correct?
Something pretty close to that. I tend to say let's Engineering 101, Wollongong Campus Session 1, because it sort of defines a unique offering in place and time, if you like.
Yeah, so what are those different types of teaching delivery that you have down at Wollongong?
Well, there's standard lectures, also known as chalk and talk, seminars, practicals, lab-based work, online. Some of the new terminology is flipped and problem-based learning, and then there's any combination of any of those.
Yep, and particularly since we're talking about costing, is there any particular reason why you need to know when, where, and how these courses are delivered?
Well, there is, and I sort of alluded to it cryptically previously, that these instances can change the input resourcing, whether it be academic time, administrative time and resourcing, or facilities. Those factors can change sometimes dramatically based on the configuration of the instance.
Yeah, because I know there was a number of universities that had issues, particularly during the pandemic, where they had to rush a lot of their course content online. And there were a number of universities that had mature online programs, and there were those who had to quickly move their content online. So that added workload to the academics to try and copy all that content and get it online. But one thing we discovered is that when they are teaching online, that the amount of time it takes to actually manage a student or liaise with students online is actually larger than in a classroom. So I presume it's because students like asking a lot more questions when it's in an online environment than in a classroom environment. So being able to understand that and understanding that workload across those different delivery methods is important from a costing perspective.
Yeah, that's insightful in itself. I think that I would agree with those statements, and that some of the components of the teaching activity, if you like, might change as well. So for example, lecture time could actually decrease because, maybe we're projecting that lecture across 6 subject instances at one time.
Yep.
Or at different times. But on the other hand, the student consultation could go up. Marking should be roughly the same, one would think.
Yep.
But,
Yep.
Yeah, it's all part of the costing process.
And the other thing that has been impacted with the pandemic is social distancing, which may actually have an impact on classroom sizes. So that's when we start looking at capacity and facility capacity at institutions. So is that something that you look at as well with your models?
Oh, you bet. I mean, we were doing that before the pandemic, thanks to your advice of your capable crew, and it all made sense because that's part of management accounting, really. So it's really the quantum or constraints over the amounts of input resources, and that yields a lot of valuable management information, really.
Yep. And when you're considering reconfiguring, redesigning, or eliminating a course, what particular things do you have to consider?
Well, there's a number of things across a variety of dimensions. They're not all financial, obviously, because I've been through a number of these before, and the teach out is a big thing. If we say, if it's a 3 or 4 year degree, as I call them, and we say, okay, we're going to stop. Well, we may have 3 or 4 years worth of students there that we need to do something with, so that's probably the main thing. But otherwise, if we're just reconfiguring or redesigning a course or a subject, the methods of input, if you like, that sort of revolve around those teaching delivery types and the instance, how many sessions the thing sought, that sort of thing, all impact on the amount of time that's calculated to provide a unit.
Yeah, so I said courses. It's this terminology thing. So so that was units and courses. Yes, in your terminology. So I mean, there's quite a lot of analysis that has to go into this from a costing perspective. So how did you do all this prior to having your current model in place?
Strangely enough, I didn't do it because I was hired to do activity-based costing.
Right, okay.
So even then, after having modeled for a number of years, I found myself using Excel and so forth. It's just a lot of work to try and do stuff manually. There's a lot of factors. So really what ABC does is helps crystallize your thinking about the main drivers for cost and revenue.
Yeah, looking for those causes of cost, where the resources are being consumed within the organisation. And in fact, that leads to one of the other things outside of standard costing, which we've been looking at recently with some other universities, is when it comes to the cost of resourcing, that environmental impact as well, which we can actually start to include those environmental costs associated with resources that are consumed within organisations. But I'll leave that for a whole separate podcast because that's a whole subject on its own. But using spreadsheets is the typical solution for what organisations do now if they don't have an ABC model. There's a lot of ad hoc analysis done in spreadsheets around the organisation to try and do the type of costing that is currently done in our types of models, which can be problematic, as you know. It can be error prone. Spreadsheets max out after a certain size, so you can only do a certain size of model in spreadsheets, and it does create islands of analysis around the organisation as well. So having a nice centralized, standardized, and systemized model is a good way to go, even if I do say so myself.
Well, and Pilbara's is the best, really.
Thanks, Fred. You're great. Hey, now, one of the things that you actually created, which I thought was a really great tool, and so great that we have copied it, and we now call it the Atom tool that we put into Power BI. But it was your program forecasting tool. So why did you create that in the first place, and who actually uses it in the organisation, and why do they use it?
Well, the reason I created it was because despite having an ABC model, when departments came and said, we want to do a new degree program, can you do a financial viability? It started becoming very difficult because every one of these things was different. You typically don't get a lot of input, in terms of a lot of things about what the thing will be, as opposed to retrospectively modeling what's happened. So that's where I sort of thought through, well, hang on a minute, this wonderful regression analysis where we dichotomize fixed and variable costs of teaching can be harnessed into a sort of a compressed tool that gives us, a viability estimate. And so it saved me a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it was standardized. It was a good thing. It was a standard process.
So just to be clear, it's a tool for forecasting the cost of new proposed courses, so degrees in at the institution, and it's a 5-year forecast, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah. We've got it out to 5 years. So one of the key drivers of it is, are they international students or domestic students, or how many of each?
Which is a big topic right at this particular moment in time.
Yeah. And the other thing is of how many subjects will be taught and how many of those would have been taught anyway.
Yep.
Because obviously if we've got a subject unit instance out there and we're just adding more students into it, there's only really just variable cost involved. But if it's a brand new subject, there's going to be fixed costs. So yeah, it's a pretty good tool.
And who actually uses it? Do you run it for the academics or do they run it themselves? Is it like a dean who would use it, or?
Well, we're sort of going through a lot of change here, as many universities probably are at this time.
Yep.
So faculty management accountants were all pretty well trained. We had all the heads of school and so forth trained to go through their faculty management accountants who, did the legwork to prepare that stuff.
Yep.
And so that was the way it was working. Now we're sort of going through more of a centralizing phase. Things are changing, but I want to get the thing back on track because people need to think in a certain way stuff done.
Yep.
I think, and this thing helps them do that.
Yeah, because I know when it comes to creating new programs, quality and pedagogy are high. They're the things that take up a lot of the thinking process and priorities for the new degrees. And costing seems to be something that's done at the end. Is it becoming more important to include that costing information for new degrees now?
Oh, well, about 12 years ago, the university instituted it was called the Course Approval Management Group.
Oh, okay.
And it's led by the Deputy Vice Chancellor Education. That group has continued. We've renamed it and so forth. But I've been on that as the finance advisor, if you like, from the beginning. So it's not a terribly new thing.
Right. Yep.
But semi-new, in geologic terms. But
Yep.
we got onto that one pretty quick. So because, a lot of these things could really get out of control, I suppose, financially.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've learned is there really aren't that many new courses or degrees, if you like, over time. It's not as big as one would think.
Okay. Yep. Well, that's about all we have for today. So thank you very much for your time today, Fred.
Thanks, Lee.
No worries. Cheers, mate. Bye.
You have been listening to Pilbara Insights, the podcast, the first dedicated audio series to support higher education leaders in their academic resource management decisions.
Pilbara Group would like to give special thanks to Fred Reich for his contribution to today's podcast. Thank you also to all of our listeners. If you'd like to learn more, please visit our website at pilbaragroup.com and stay tuned for the next episode of Pilbara Insights, the podcast, coming soon.